Hey guys, hope everybody's doing well. Hopefully you've dodged the sickness so far. Uh, this is my first attempt at trying to teach you via the internet, so we'll see how it goes. Um, this is for the Regents class, so everybody who's in that is hopefully watching this or will watch this. Um, the goal here is to try to keep things going as much as possible, as far as we can do. Keep moving the ball forward as we're getting closer to the end of the year. So my hope is that we'll still be able to do some decent learning here, and then be able to pick it up when we end up coming back together. So just as a bit of an overview, you will have something that's assigned to you pretty much every day um, on this Google Classroom. So everybody should be logged into that at this point and probably is seeing this video on there. So everything will be on there. You can go on there every day. I'll try to have things posted in the mornings of each day, and there should be um, give or take give or take 20 to 30 minutes of work for the day. Shouldn't be too much work. I've kind of broken everything down into manageable pieces. So 20 to 30 minutes is about how much you should be spending doing U.S. history stuff. Um, Everything will be loaded on there, digital copies of everything. You can always print everything off if you want them. You can follow along with whatever we're doing here. You can do kind of whatever you need to do that way. If you should have questions about anything, you can always email me. My email is tmiller@moraviaschool.org. So you can do that. Or also, there's a couple hours every day when I'm basically guaranteeing that I'll be around for pretty immediate feedback. Those hours are from 10 to 11 in the morning, and then 6:30 to 7:30 at night. So that's every weekday. You could contact me at that point, and I would get back to you relatively quickly. We could also talk over like a Google Hangouts or voice chat or video chat if needed, as well as um, just sending emails back and forth would probably be the other option too. So that is an option for you that you can use. You will find that sometimes we're doing some different things in here. I'll try to keep things kind of more or less as consistent as possible. For example, today we're going to be talking through some notes, and I'll show you in this video, and I'll pull up the PowerPoint here. Attached in this Google Classroom, you should find a copy of the notes. In case you don't have yours, you should find a copy of my master copy of the notes, so then you can use those to follow along with if you want. The PowerPoint is also in there, so you can look at that. Or you can kind of just listen along. There will be a couple questions at the end of the lesson that you'll need to answer on a Google form. So that'll be talked about more then. So we'll go ahead and we'll get into it. Okay, so hopefully at this point you've got your notes out, or at least are looking at this so you can kind of see the PowerPoint here. I've got it pulled up in the bottom corner, as you can see. So where we had left off on Friday, I guess it was we were talking through kind of the beginning of FDR's plans as he becomes president. So we had talked about kind of his first 100 days and how that's the kind of the new benchmark for presidents to kind of decide whether or not they're successful or not in their early time in office. So the first 3.5-ish months is kind of the first measuring stick for presidents. So we said that FDR ended up passing 15 major pieces of legislation during his first 100 days, which is kind of unprecedented at this point. So that's kind of where we had left off. And then I had promised that we would get into specifics about some of these major pieces of legislation. So our goal today is um, to get through all eight of these pieces of legislation, and then also get through 7 and 8, and then we will call it quits. So that's where we're going. Before I get there, I need to show you my board over here. I've got three R's that are written on there. Usually the New Deal, at least by historians, is described as doing a lot of good things, but there's kind of three categories that they break it down into. Each program can kind of be placed in one or more of these categories. We call it the three R's: relief, recovery, and reform. So that's kind of the I guess the understanding that we kind of need to come into the New Deal with. There's sometimes when FDR and Congress ends up providing relief to normal Americans in the problems of the Great Depression. There's sometimes when we try to recover and fix issues that went wrong in the Great Depression, and then also reform, kind of solve the issues so it doesn't happen again. Change the situation so it doesn't happen again. So that's kind of the deal there with three R's: relief, recovery, reform. So we will get into each of these different pieces of legislation. I don't have any pictures for the first few, but when we get down to the Tennessee Valley Authority, I'll have a picture there. So just bear with me for the first four here. So the first one there on your sheet is the Emergency Banking Bill, passed in 1933. This is one of the first things that FDR did when he became president. What it ends up doing is it has to deal with banking, obviously, as you can probably tell. It ends up declaring a bank holiday. Basically, all the banks would close for 4 days. They'd close for 4 days, allowing them to get their accounts in order before reopening and make sure that they've got money there. So then the people who are showing up to take money out actually have money to draw out. So it's a bank holiday, similar to the situation that we saw when we watched the clip from It's a Wonderful Life. They declared a bank holiday to allow the bank to get everything in order. So this one probably feels more like a relief bill. If I'm thinking about the three R's, it's probably more of a relief thing than others. You maybe could argue some others, but it feels more like relief. So that's the Emergency Banking Bill. Next up is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, also known as the FDIC. That's the acronym there, and that was passed in 1933. Has to deal with insurance, but not the insurance that you're probably used to, like car insurance or health insurance. This has to deal with insurance on deposits, which are people's money in banks, essentially. So this FDIC ends up insuring money that is in banks up to $5,000 at the outset. So essentially, if I have $5,000 in the bank, if the bank closes, the federal government is guaranteeing that they will get me that money back up to $5,000. So it is essentially another way for people to be safeguarded with their money, or to have their money feel like it's safer. Nowadays, we still have the FDIC in today's America. You can go into a bank and usually somewhere on the window or someplace, it'll say FDIC insured. And the money nowadays is, I want to say, up closer to $100,000 that'll be protected. It might be $100,000, but it's up there. So you get a lot of money that's kind of saved in case you have an issue, or in case your bank fails. So that's the FDIC, still around today. The third one on the sheet is the Securities and Exchange Commission, also known as the SEC. And that one is also around again today, still today. The SEC regulates the stock market. Remember, there was all these issues with the stock market when you would have the stocks crashing and people buying on margin and just bad, risky practices in the stock market. and the stock market ended up crashing to kind of help kick off this Great Depression. So that's a big area in which we need to reform. We need to change around the way that we work with the stock market. So it ends up regulating the stock market, making it safer for investors, trying to prevent those bad habits, those bad investing habits that led to the Great Depression. So it's the SEC still today is kind of a regulation body over top of the stock market. So if anything is decided that there's an issue with the stock market, the SEC can kind of deal with it. So it's a regulation body. So I think that one would be more of probably a reform sort of thing, reform bill. The FDIC, I'd forgotten to mention, that one seems like it could be falling into a few categories. You could definitely think about it as reform, but you could also think about it as kind of an immediate recovery or relief sort of effort. So that one's maybe a little bit not as clear. Now, the last one that we got to talk about before I get into some pictures here is the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA, not the AAA that you might know from like roadside service or anything. This is a different AAA. So the AAA here was passed in 1933. This ends up solving an issue with farmers. Remember, we were talking about farmers and how they had very low demand for their products. They were producing a lot of goods, and they were not being able to sell them. The products were just kind of dropping in price, and people weren't able to make ends meet as farmers. So what the AAA does is it pays farmers some extra money to keep them in business. They actually even paid them, and this sounds a little weird, they paid them to destroy crops, paid them to kill livestock in some cases. And you might be like, well, why would they do that? They could sell that. It's all about the market. So the market has a certain amount of supply, and in order to have that supply, or in order to sell that supply, you need to have demand for it. If there's too much supply, nobody's going to buy your products, or at least for a living wage. Nobody's going to buy it because there's so much of them out there. So that's essentially the idea. They kill off some of the crops, kill off some of the livestock, lower the supply of the products that the farmers have, and then you are able to charge a better rate for your stuff, charge a better I guess, price. So the AAA, it's a little weird. It doesn't seem like it would be that decent of an idea. Or, I mean, it might be a decent idea, but it's a little weird. It's not something that we would automatically jump right into. So this one feels like a relief bill, but also maybe a recovery. If you think about trying to help people kind of pull themselves out of this depression, or pull out of this depression, definitely feels kind of like a mixture between the two. So let's go ahead and go on to the TVA. So the Tennessee Valley Authority was also passed in 1933. All but one of these so far that we've seen have been passed in FDR's first little while in office. So the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, this one is feels a lot like a relief and a recovery bill. Basically, what had happened was in the Tennessee Valley, there was a Tennessee River. The Tennessee River ended up having a lot of flooding, and it was kind of untamed, I guess you could say. So the Tennessee River was a very poor area, the Tennessee River Valley. So what this does is the TVA ends up being created. They would hire workers to go to the Tennessee Valley, or workers from the Tennessee Valley, and they would create a series of dams in Tennessee along the Tennessee River to prevent against flooding, so to control the river, but then also to help out in creating electricity. So they would both control the river and prevent against natural disasters, but they would also create a lot of electricity for people to use. So it is a decent program. This is one of the more famous ones. The TVA, you probably heard of it before. You can see there, those guys in that picture, they are stringing up power lines, it looks like. So it is a electricity. It is a natural disaster prevention sort of thing, but then it also provides jobs for people. So it's kind of a multiple bag sort of a mixed bag sort of thing. Okay, next one, the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. This one is, out of all of these, probably the most famous one. The Civilian Conservation Corps was a kind of a natural protection sort of thing. If you think about all of our areas in America, we've got a lot of forest areas, we've got a lot of national parks, we've got a lot of good nature preserve areas. The idea here is that 2 million people, 2 million men get hired under this Civilian Conservation Corps. They get hired to go around to different forests, to plant forests, build trails in parks, fight forest fires, all that stuff. They would do a bunch of different things. For example, you guys know the Fillmore Glen just down the road from the school. The Fillmore Glen, the pavilion there. If you go in there and there's a big plaque on the wall up in the front of the pavilion. It says created by the CCC. So the Civilian Conservation Corps were in Moravia, and there was a camp south of the village, and they ended up doing a lot of work at the Glen, cutting some trails, that sort of thing. I know that I was telling you my story about my great grandma, the one who had to get a job during the Great Depression and was working as a waitress. That one, the one who also met John D. Rockefeller. That great grandma. Her husband. I'm not sure if they were married at the time, so it would be my great grandpa. I never met him, but my great grandpa was actually part of the CCC at this time and working in the area to help out. So it provided jobs for a lot of Americans, 2 million people, and some people that we probably know and that are close to us. The CCC was noted to be FDR's favorite New Deal program. So he said that it was his favorite. It did the most good for what he wanted it to do. It provided jobs, but also allowed for the natural side of America to kind of be preserved for future generations. So that one's more of probably the most famous one on here. Next up is the NRA. Not that NRA. You know what I'm talking about. Not the gun one. This is the National Recovery Administration, the NRA. The National Recovery Administration ended up establishing minimum wages for workers and minimum prices for goods. So you end up kind of volunteering to pay your workers a minimum wage, but then also setting minimum prices for whatever products you're creating. To my understanding, this would have been a program that people could have signed in or signed up for. If you are a business owner, you could sign up to be a part of the NRA, and then you're volunteering to pay your workers those wages. So you're volunteering to kind of live by those standards. So that's kind of the deal with that one. The NRA, I would probably say, is probably a relief, but also maybe a reform. If you think about kind of changing the way that businesses operate, I think it fits into that side a little bit better. The CCC, I forgot to mention, I think is probably a relief bill, but then also recovery, helping out certain areas that might need help. I brought my water bottle home with me, so it is unable to be stolen at this present time. Yeah. Next up, last one here before we get into 7 and 8, and then we'll be done. Public Works Administration, the PWA. The PWA ends up creating a bunch of public works, which are usually described as like infrastructure. What that means is like bridges, dams, power plants, government buildings, different things that a lot of people use and a lot of people benefit from. So those infrastructure projects are kind of what this PWA focuses on. Here you've got a picture of the PWA working inside a tunnel. If I remember correctly, when I put this in here, I think it is the Lincoln Tunnel going into New York City. So it lays on the bottom of the Hudson River. I'm pretty sure that's what that is, if I'm remembering correctly. But this PWA ends up creating millions of jobs for Americans, but also helping the economy, helping out the government as they're trying to build these projects. So they need to build these infrastructure projects and might as well hire people to do it. So that's kind of what they decided to do. So that one would probably be more of I mean, yeah, probably a relief and recovery again. Relief giving people jobs, recovery helping build up some of these crumbling infrastructure things that had been failing over the course of the time period. So next up here, we have critics of the New Deal. Okay, critics of the New Deal. We have a lot of people here. Okay, a lot of people here who support the New Deal. There's a large number of mostly Democrats, but even some Republicans, even some fringe American groups that support the New Deal. They are in favor of it. Most conservatives, however, do not appreciate the New Deal. Remember, there is a difference in American society right now in terms of what is acceptable for the government to do. The liberals here and the New Deal Democrats were of the mindset that it is the government's job to pull Americans out of this depression. The conservatives are not agreeing with that at all. Conservatives would say, it's individuals that need to step up and make these changes. It is not the government's job. This is government overreach. This is the government doing more than they're supposed to do. The government was never created to do this, is kind of the perspective here. So most conservatives kind of share that perspective. Some liberals, many liberals, mostly kind of fringe socialists or communists or what have you. Some people think that FDR doesn't go far enough, thinks that FDR needs to continue the New Deal and needs to expand it to kind of include more areas. This is an opportunity in their perspective for the government to get involved in more things and the government to improve society in more ways. So many liberals actually feel that FDR does not go far enough. Most liberals, I would say, though, are kind of feeling like this political cartoon here that's over here with FDR. He's standing up there in a boat, which is potentially ironic because he actually couldn't walk. I'll talk more about that in a later time. But FDR standing up there in a boat, and he's pulling Uncle Sam out of this this I guess tempest, this big time storm, and it's labeled depression. And on the side of the boat it says national recovery. So he is pulling Uncle Sam out. He's pulling America out of this depression, and the depression is kind of stopped by him saving America. Is kind of the perspective. Now, there's one guy pictured over here on the I guess that's the right. I'm trying to get my perspective straight here. So one guy pictured on the right, his name is, and I've got him up here on the board. His name is Huey Long. So Huey Long is there. Huey Long was a senator from Louisiana. He was probably the biggest critic, or at least one of the most vocal critics of FDR and the New Deal. He ends up running for president against FDR, but he is a socialist, so he is kind of a more extreme liberal than FDR is. So he runs for the Democratic nomination in the 1930s against FDR. I want to say. So he ends up being a very big critic here. Thinks the income should be even more drastically kind of changed hands. So sent over to the poor, redistributed. You probably heard of the phrase redistribution of wealth. That's kind of what Huey Long is advocating for here. Use taxes to take money away from the richer side of America and give it out to the poor people, or I guess at least help out those poor people. So he's a critic kind of from the liberal side, which is interesting. Not every liberal actually appreciated the New Deal. So my plan was to get through number 8. I got through number 7. We're at 25 minutes right now, so I think I'm going to cut it off. At this point, there is a Google form that is in the classroom. So it's got a couple questions from what we did today. All I need from you is just a couple sentences on each question. Just type them up and submit the Google form. That tells me that you were, I guess, listening or I guess checking in for today. So that's kind of how we'll operate with kind of attendance wise. It's not going to be like graded or anything in that regard. But I'm just going to kind of look at it to see, okay, are you guys listening to what I'm saying? Are you thinking about what I'm saying? So take a look at that. You can go in there and submit that. And after that, we're done for the day. Should be about 30 minutes. So check back in tomorrow morning. I should have another video posted, and we'll go through more of the second New Deal and then some controversy that FDR gets into the late 1930s. So take it easy, behave yourselves, stay out of trouble, social distance, 6 feet, you know the deal. And hopefully we can tack another number up there tomorrow. So take care, stay safe.